I'll always be a failure, living a lie, never succeeding at what I set out to do.
Shut the up, Marinette.
Hi, hello, welcome back to my channel, or if you're new here, hi, I'm Anarchii, your favorite artistic little hellspawn. If you like what you see here, I hope you stick around for my future content. So, Miraculous Ladybug, it's a show, and not a particularly good one. Issues spanning from plots that are so overdrawn and have so many holes that they could be equivalent to a stretched slice of Swiss cheese, to horrendously written and forced romances that nobody asked for, to overall just piss poor character writing. Miraculous is kinda known for being more so a guilty pleasure show than a show that actually has any major leaps in quality. Now, I want to be clear, this is my opinion, this is just my opinion, but I also don't really feel like I need to say that. If you do not know, I used to be on TikTok, and a lot of my TikToks were about Miraculous Ladybug. And that's when I kind of learned that majority of Miraculous's critics are people within its own fan base. I frankly find it very rare to find an actual critic that has never been in the fandom or has just never seen the show or aren't actively interacting with the show. And it's because of that that I'm actually not going to be putting much of a rant into this video. I will still be putting my input here and there if I really feel like it's needed, but overall there are so many video essays and series talking about the issues of Miraculous that I frankly feel like I'm not really adding anything of value to the conversation, and I personally don't want to waste your time. And with that being said, let's get into the reimagining of Miraculous Ladybug. Now, if you actually don't know what Miraculous is, that's perfectly fine. You really don't need to. All you need to know is that these two kids were given magical jewelry that gives them superpowers based on the black cat and the ladybug, and it makes them superheroes. And that's because I am completely overhauling this story from the lore to its characters. And most of what I wrote is based on various scrapped concepts and ideas for the story and world building that I could find from the PV version, stuff that was scrapped from the movie. I researched a lot of stuff for this. The first thing I changed was the miracle box. I both lowered the amount of Miraculouses and removed the outer circle, specifically the Chinese zodiac Miraculouses. Kinda. They still exist in this world. They're just not in this specific box, because in my AU, I scrapped all the useless and kind of ugly, unnecessary heroes that have completely unexplained systems and replaced them with cross-culture miracle boxes. This was already implied in the New York special, and I really do not know why they didn't hone in on it, but every major continent and country has a miracle box across the globe. There's a main box, and that will be the bigger boxes, but for things like capitals and cities, there will be smaller boxes. So the Chinese zodiac Miraculouses are actually being placed in Shanghai. And we'd see them in a hypothetical Shanghai special, and they're led by the Dragon Miraculous. The main miracle box we see in this story is actually not set to one area, and it's actually found on an island that can kind of be deemed in the center of the world. And this is because this miracle box is meant to be seen as a sign of unity and community amongst all the guardians and the world at large. The Kwami specifically, though, were created in the beginning of time and space with the Big Bang, specifically two Kwamis, Mother of Harmony and Father of Chaos, also known as Creation and Destruction, also known as Tiki and Plag. And originally, these two were completely in control of the worlds, galaxies, and timelines created for this universe and maintaining its balance. However, after a couple thousand, tens of thousands of years, they got a little bored, a little lonely, so they decided to create their quote-unquote children, in a sense. And that was the first concepts ever brought into the universe: emotion, perception, protection, control, curiosity, intuition, strength, connection, mobility, and viability. If you don't know what viability is, it means life. I don't know why, I just feel like people won't know what that means. And later, future Kwamis came into be, and every single one stems from one of these main concepts. And every Kwami is born whenever a new concept comes into being with the universe, but by extension, if a Kwami dies or ceases to exist, the concept they have created dies and ceases to exist with it. For example, if the Kwami of emotion dies, then everyone and everything in the world will lose its emotion. However, this also led to there being two types of Kwamis. There's metaphorical Kwamis, which are Kwamis based on non-physical constructs and concepts, things like love, creativity, chaos, etc. And there's physicality Kwamis, and these are things based on physical or man-made concepts, such as elementals, the sun, the moon, etc. When it was the Kwamis by themselves, everything was just fine. It's when humanity and life came to be that they started having some issues. Kwamis don't really understand the concept of morality all too well. They transcend humanity, so they often do what's in their best interest, which not only conflicts with each other, but conflicts with the more mortal life seen on things like Earth, which is where their powers are more often affecting. And yes, these casualties mostly came from plague. And this led to the first Guardian trapping these creatures into jewels to make them more manageable. And making them be used by people gives a human soul to keep them more grounded and help them understand morality better. And these jewels became known as the Miraculous. And thanks to that Guardian, a sanctuary was created where these beings took refuge in kind of their own little world separate from the rest of society. And soon, several others were made around the world. And as Kwamis grew to learn and grow, they started to take various different forms. Sometimes they took the forms of people, other times objects, and currently they're taking the forms of animals. And a system was created where the humans in the sanctuary are picked and prophesized by the Kwamis to spread their concepts across the world and keep them alive and powerful. And once they're picked, the Guardians would relay tasks and other missions onto the wielders, and together they created a beautiful magical society with little villages and civilizations all over the world, as they felt the Miraculous were too powerful to be open to the general public, which is why they stayed so secretive. And while they lived in harmony for several generations, around 20 years before the beginning of the story, a Guardian went rogue after a prophecy didn't go his way. Remember this, guys. That's a surprise tool that'll help us later. But anyway, he used the Peacock Miraculous to try to escape fate, only for it to backfire and lead to the destruction of the Center Guardian Sanctuary and the island that went with it. And while he was able to escape with his young adult daughter, the Miracle Box and the Spellbook, majority of the Guardians, including his wife, perished on the island as it went down. This Guardian proceeded to blame the Miraculouses, and more particularly the Kwamis, for the tragedy, so in his grief he put it in a chest and left them to the ocean, hoping they would never resurface. And that's all the lore I can give you right now. I have a lot more planned, but I have to save that for future videos. But don't worry, we're not done. We still have a bug to design. So without further ado, I introduce to you the first main character of the story, Mechi Fan Kalame. So, it's mostly agreed upon that Marinette is a poorly written protagonist. In fact, after the ending of Season 5, I've seen more and more people say she borderlines being a Mary Sue for, frankly, pretty good reasons. They tend to treat her as if she's right all the time, she rarely faces impactful consequences for her actions, which leads to her not really developing as a character. She's forced to be the center of plot points that frankly should be for other characters, more notably Adrian. Her bad actions are either brushed under the rug because the characters affected don't know about them, or they're just blamed on other circumstances and people by characters in the overall narrative around her, such as her stalking of Adrian being blamed on Chloe, which in turn also gives her a massive victim complex that she never really develops from. She often has answers to solutions handed to her instead of seeking them out herself, despite supposedly being this super creative and intelligent character. A big one being Hawkmoth's identity in the 5th season being given to her by Kagami and Felix, despite her should be looking for it herself instead of worrying about, dating a boy. Man, personally, I need us to evaluate our priorities, cause this ain't it. This ain't it. But yeah, this character has a lot of issues, and I suggest watching the various videos out there if you want to know about her issues in detail. Me personally though, I think a lot of people, writers included, miss how good of an opportunity that the flaws Marinette seems to have are to the story, especially when it comes to romance. She really could have been such a fun and interesting character if she wasn't treated like she could do no wrong. Now, I kinda get why, when it comes to protagonists in this category, while still having flaws, they tend to be a bit more squeaky clean. And don't get me wrong, I love characters like this. One of my favorite magical girl protagonists is Miyuki from Smile Pretty Cure. But personally, I think flawed protagonists are even better. I feel a lot can be done when a character's flaws are on full display, and it's such an interesting feat to watch them grow and change as they go on their journey for the better or for the worst. Or even an arc similar to Steven Universe, where his flaws become more and more prevalent and impactful as he gets older and because of his trauma. And that's kind of a similar route I'm going to be going with my reimagining, and I'll be keeping majority of Marinette's major flaws, though I will be removing the more extreme stuff like breaking into Adrian's house and memorizing his schedule. For her design, however, I don't really have any issues with Marinette's civilian design. I think it's cute, I think it works for a character, but I do have an issue with Ladybug's design, as, again, majority of the fandom does. As everyone has stated time and time again, Ladybug's design is bland, boring, and empty, especially compared to other heroes we meet later in the story. And while she does get a new suit, which is better, I do feel like it's a bit late for her to be getting this upgrade. For my design though, I'm going to be going with completely different design conventions, mostly because I want to make them work as dolls. Miraculous has dolls, and they're varying in quality, and they're not varying that much. So yeah, frankly, my redesign will be mostly based on other designs I've made over the years for this project, so I don't really remember my thought process, unfortunately, but I do remember I wanted her outfits to have more cultural influence. I wanted to keep her pigtails in some way, even if I had to change how they're shaped, and wanted some type of indication of her clumsiness, which is why in her civilian design she has ripped stockings. But that's really all I have to say about the redesigns. Let's get to the meat of this. The rewrite. Now, my version of Marinette, Mei-Chi, is a 16-year-old Chinese-French girl from, and please forgive me if I pronounce this wrong, Fenghuang, China. She's a sweet, awkward, excitable, anxious girl with very low self-esteem after a pretty lonely childhood. This also leads to her being a bit more naive and a somewhat childish person. Being raised by her mother, father, and grandfather as a truly normal girl with a truly normal life. However, Mei-Chi grew up very sheltered with very protective but loving parents, more particularly her mother. If you want to know for reference, she has a very similar relationship to Mei and her mother in Turning Red. And this is for a particular reason that we don't find out till later in the story, but just know it's plot relevant. However, she also doesn't have many friends and tended to be ignored by those around her until her clumsiness and costly mistakes tend to make her the laughingstock of those around her. However, she's always loved the world of fashion. She's loved making her own clothes, she's loved drawing, she dreams of being one of those designers on the runways in Paris. However, she's also really loved the idea of romance, from seeing dating in schools to watching shows where romance is very prevalent, to the overall expectation of her as a girl needing to find the perfect ideal partner. Mei has always been infatuated by the idea of someone coming to sweep her off her feet and take her loneliness away. She's had countless crushes that never really went anywhere at best, and at worst ended with her being so heartbroken that she just stayed in her room for days until she found another crush to latch onto. And she tends to cling to anyone who offers the slightest bit of affection and support. So I'm sure you can tell by now that Mei has some attachment issues. She's codependent and she relies on others for her happiness and validation, and whenever she's lost, she looks outward instead of inward. However, Mei's happiness is also greatly connected to her creativity, and she feels cramped and depressed in situations where she doesn't feel stimulated. But she's often prone to jumping to conclusions about things and people, and this combined with her hopeless romantic attitude results in a lot of difficult situations. And it also doesn't help that she tends to be a bit delulu, as being in delusion helps her feel a little better. And this amplifies tenfold when she meets Aymeric Dior, this story's version of Adrian, who was the first person to interact kindly with her during her first week at DuPont College after winning an admissions lottery and moving from China to Paris with her grandpa, with her parents staying behind in China to kind of keep their lives going and make sure they can still support her. So yeah, a lot of money's going into this, a lot of time, a lot of sacrifices, and a lot of pressure. So Aymeric kind of serves as an escape, a form of coping for Mei. And another coping mechanism she has is being a superhero known as La Senelle. This is meant to be a play on the French saying for Ladybug. And when she's La Senelle, she feels like the best version of herself, often leading to her ditching her civilian responsibilities for make her feel better. She's graceful, she's confident, she's on point, and she tends to just do things so much better than when she's just normal, clumsy, quiet May that no one even bats an eye at. Which is why I decided to make her ladybug design a bit more flashy. However, this has given May a bit of an ego, so she tends to not listen to advice, be a bit prideful, and tends to think she's always right, which often leads to situations that her version of Cat Noir would have to help her clean up. But don't worry, he has issues in his own right that she has to clean up. They work together that way. Her powers still say relatively the same, except I removed the whole lucky charm bit of it and I changed it to where she actually has to make the item herself and find creative ways to use it instead of it just being handed to her and her having to find a way to use it. I feel like that's better and really hones in on her like creative ability, and she uses the magical ladybugs to do that. And I also removed the restoration ability. I don't think that's necessary. I feel like it kind of removes the stakes of the story. I also made it to where Cat Noir is the only one who can destroy an akumatized object, but she's the only one that can purify an akuma. We need to give the boy some relevance. Now, I would go into how she found the Ladybug Miraculous, the big important plot points she has in the story, but frankly, I feel like those should be kept for separate story videos that I make after I introduce all the main characters. So, that's all I have for you today. I had way more fun with this project than I thought I would, and I can't wait to make more parts of the series. If you have any names for this AU or any questions you want me to answer in future videos, please let me know down below. If you made it this far, comment a flower or a ladybug emoji to tell me which design you liked the best, and I'll see you next time. Bye-bye!